gray afternoon in Kyoto, rain fell in soft sheets, turning the streets into mirrors that reflected the blurred glow of lanterns and passing headlights. Inside the central train station, travelers hurried beneath umbrellas, their shoes clicking against wet tiles, minds fixed on destinations, delays, or dinner plans. Few noticed the old upright piano tucked near Platform 3, a relic from a forgotten public art project, its wood dull with dust, its keys yellowed like old paper. Most days it sat untouched, a silent piece of furniture in a place built for motion. But that day, someone stopped. She was 17, small in stature, wearing a slightly wrinkled school uniform, navy skirt, white blouse, black loafers scuffed at the toes. A worn canvas bag hung from her shoulder, stuffed with sheet music and a thermos of barley tea. She didn't look like someone who belonged on stages or in glossy magazines. She looked like any other student rushing between classes and part-time shifts, but her eyes, dark and steady, fixed on the piano as if it had called her name. For weeks she'd walked past it, always too shy to sit, always telling herself she wasn't good enough, that people would laugh, that someone would tell her to move along. But today something shifted. Maybe it was the way the rain muffled the noise of the station, wrapping the space in a kind of hush. Maybe it was the memory of her mother's hands, rough from years of stitching silk kimonos, handing her a second-hand piano manual with a quiet, "Try." She took a breath, walked over, and brushed the dust off the bench with her sleeve. Then carefully she opened her notebook. The pages were dog-eared and smudged, filled with pencil markings, arrows, circles, tiny notes in the margins like "slow here" or "feel the sadness." At the top of one page, in neat handwriting, was the title Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9, Heartfelt by Frédéric Chopin. Her fingers hovered above the keys. They trembled, not from cold but from the weight of everything unsaid. She hadn't played for anyone in years, not since her middle school recital, when she'd frozen halfway through and run off stage in tears. Since then, music had been her secret, her refuge. She practiced late at night in the family's one-bedroom apartment, muffling the piano's sound with blankets so as not to disturb her younger brother's sleep. Her mother never complained, even when neighbors knocked on the wall. "Let her play," she'd say. "It's the only time she's not carrying the world." Now, alone in the station, she pressed the first note. It rang out, clear, soft, like a single drop of water falling into a still pond. A businessman glancing at his watch paused. A high school girl scrolling through her phone looked up. An elderly woman carrying a bento box slowed her steps. No one spoke. No one moved closer. They just listened. The melody unfolded slowly, tenderly. She wasn't playing for perfection. There were small hesitations, a slightly uneven rhythm in the left hand. But there was something deeper in her playing. A kind of honesty. You could hear the loneliness in the long pauses, the hope in the rising phrases, the quiet ache of someone who'd learned to speak through music because words never felt enough. As she played, memories surfaced unbidden. Her father's absence. He'd left when she was 8, leaving only a faded photo and a broken metronome. Her mother working double shifts during winter. Her brother asking why they couldn't afford piano lessons like his classmates. But also, the warmth of her mother humming along while folding laundry. The pride in her brother's eyes when she played him a lullaby. The way the rain sounded on their tiny balcony, like nature's own rhythm section. By the time she reached the final chords, a small circle had formed around the piano. Not a crowd, just a handful of people who'd stopped their rushing, if only for 4 minutes. When the last note faded into the air, there was silence. Not awkward, not empty, just full. Then the elderly woman bowed slightly. The businessman nodded. The schoolgirl gave a small, genuine smile. The girl closed her notebook, cheeks warm, and stood quickly as if afraid the moment would vanish if she lingered too long. She didn't look at anyone. She just slung her bag over her shoulder and walked toward the exit. Heart pounding, but something had changed. Later that evening, back in her apartment, she found her brother waiting by the door, eyes wide. "You were at the station," he said, not as a question but as fact. She froze. "How did you—" "I saw the video," he whispered, holding up his phone. There, on a local community forum, was a 30-second clip. Shaky, grainy, but unmistakably her. The caption read, "Who is this girl? She made me cry with Chopin at Kyoto Station." She felt panic rise in her throat. "Delete it," she said, voice tight. "Please." But her brother shook his head. It's already been shared. Mom saw it too. Her mother was in the kitchen stirring miso soup. She turned, her face tired but soft. You played beautifully, she said simply. No praise, no pressure, just truth. Then she added, but if you don't want this, we can pretend it never happened. The girl sat at the table, staring at her hands. They still smelled faintly of rain and station dust. Part of her wanted to hide, to never go near that piano again. But another part, smaller but stubborn, remembered the silence after the last note. The way strangers had looked at her not with judgment but with something like gratitude. Over the next few days, she avoided the station. She took different routes to her part-time job at the convenience store, kept her head down in class, and practiced only when the house was empty. But the video kept spreading. A teacher posted it on the school's internal board. A local radio host mentioned it on air. People started showing up at the station during lunch hours hoping to hear her play. They didn't know her name. They didn't know her story. But they knew the sound of her Chopin. She watched from a distance once, hidden behind a pillar near the ticket gates. Saw the piano surrounded by a few curious onlookers. Saw someone place a single white lily on the bench. Felt a strange mix of fear and wonder. That night she dreamed of her father, not as he was, but as a shadow sitting at a grand piano in an empty concert hall. He didn't speak. He just pointed to the keys and walked away. When she woke, her pillow was damp. The next morning, she made a decision. She didn't bring her phone. Didn't tell anyone where she was going. She just put on her uniform, packed her notebook, and walked to the station as the sun rose over the city's tiled roofs. The piano was empty. The lily was gone, but the bench was clean. Someone had wiped it. She sat down. This time she chose Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor. A harder piece, stormier, full of questions and longing. Her fingers found their way. Not perfectly, but with growing confidence. And as the music filled the space, more people stopped. Not just commuters, tourists, students, even a street vendor pushing his cart paused to listen. No one filmed. No one shouted. They just stood still, as if the station itself had taken a breath. When she finished, a man in a worn suit stepped forward. He looked to be in his 70s, with silver hair and kind eyes. Without a word, he placed a folded piece of paper on the piano stand and walked away. She opened it later, in the quiet of a nearby park. In elegant handwriting, it read, "You play not to impress, but to speak. That is rare. Keep listening to your heart. It knows the music better than any teacher." She tucked the note into her notebook, right beside the smudged etude. Back home that evening, her brother asked, "Will you go again?" She didn't answer right away. She was peeling daikon for dinner, the knife moving steadily in her hand. Finally, she said, "I think I have to. Not for fame, not for validation, but because, for the first time, she realized her music wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to the tired nurse who cried during the nocturne, to the student who missed his grandmother, to the stranger who needed to believe that beauty still existed in ordinary places, and maybe, just maybe, it belonged to her too. Finally, fully. So the next day, and the day after that, she returned. Not as a prodigy, not as a viral sensation, just as a girl with a notebook, a love for Chopin, and a quiet hope that her music might in some small way make someone feel less alone. The rain had stopped. The station buzzed with its usual chaos. But near Platform 3, time seemed to slow, just enough for a few notes, a shared silence, and the beginning of something neither planned nor predicted, but deeply, beautifully human. The quiet rhythm of her days began to shift almost without her noticing. At first, it was just a few more people lingering near the piano during her usual afternoon slot. Students skipping cram school for a moment of calm, office workers unwinding before the evening commute, even a few tourists who'd heard rumors of the girl who plays Chopin like she's whispering secrets. She never announced when she'd be there. She simply showed up when she could, between her shift at the convenience store and helping her younger brother with homework, and each time she played as if no one were listening, even though more and more they were. Her mother watched these changes from the edges of their small life. She didn't ask questions. She just made sure there was always rice in the pot and clean socks in the drawer. But one evening, while mending a torn sleeve by the dim light of their kitchen, she said softly, "People are talking about you at the market." The kimono shop owner said her daughter cried when she heard you play. The girl looked up from her math textbook, surprised. She cried? Her mother nodded, said it reminded her of her grandmother's funeral, the way the music held both sadness and peace. The girl didn't know what to say. She'd never thought her playing could do that, reach into someone's memory and hold it gently. But with attention came noise. One Tuesday, as she sat down to play, a man in a dark jacket stepped forward with a camera. "Just a quick interview," he said, already rolling. She froze. Her fingers, which had been warm and ready on the keys, went cold. She shook her head, stood up, and walked away without a word. The camera followed for a few steps before giving up. That night she lay awake, heart racing, imagining strangers dissecting her every note online, mocking her simple clothes, questioning whether she was real or just a stage stunt by the station authorities. She didn't return to the piano for 3 days, her brother noticed. "You're scared," he said one morning over breakfast, stirring his miso soup slowly. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation, quiet and true. She didn't deny it. "What if they think I'm pretending? What if I'm not good enough?" He looked at her, eyes serious beyond his years. "You played for me last week when I couldn't sleep. That was real. That's all that matters." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Still, the fear lingered like a shadow. Online, the conversation grew louder. A popular lifestyle blogger posted a long thread. "Is the Kyoto Station pianist authentic?" Some comments praised her raw emotion. Others insisted no untrained teenager could interpret Chopin so deeply. "She must have a ghost teacher," one user wrote. "Or it's all edited." A classical music forum debated whether her technique was sloppy or refreshingly human. She read a few posts, then deleted the app from her phone. Her mother found it in the trash bin later and said nothing, just plugged it back in and left it on the counter as if to say, "You don't have to look, but it's there if you need to." Meanwhile, life kept moving. She worked her shift at the convenience store, stacking onigiri and scanning barcodes, her uniform smelling faintly of rice and plastic wrap. Customers didn't recognize her, why would they? She was just another tired teen with tired eyes. At school, teachers treated her the same, though a few classmates glanced at her differently, whispering behind cupped hands. She kept her head down, focused on exams, on saving enough yen to help with the electric bill, on making sure her brother had new shoes before winter. But music wouldn't let her go. One rainy evening, unable to sleep, she crept to the living room and lifted the fall board of their old upright. The piano groaned softly, its strings slightly out of tune. She played the nocturne again. Not for anyone, not for anything, just because her hands missed the weight of the keys. Halfway through, she heard a sniffle. Her brother stood in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket. "Play the part where it sounds like stars falling," he whispered. She smiled and started over. That small moment reminded her why she began in the first place. Not for crowds, not for validation, but because music was the only language that never failed her. So she returned to the station. This time she chose a weekday morning when fewer people passed through. The piano bench was dry. The air smelled of coffee and damp coats. She opened her notebook to a new piece, Chopin's Fantaisie Impromptu, one she'd been practicing in secret, its rapid runs and shifting moods both thrilling and terrifying. She took a breath and began. Her fingers flew, not with showy speed but with a kind of urgent tenderness. The left hand pulsed like a heartbeat. The right danced like light on water. She forgot the station, forgot the fear, forgot everything except the conversation between her hands and the keys. When she finished, sweat dotted her brow. She looked up, expecting emptiness. Instead, a small group stood nearby. Maybe 10 people, no more. Among them was the elderly woman with the bento box, now holding a thermos. A young man in a university hoodie gave a quiet clap. And there, near the pillar, was the retired pianist, the one who'd left the note. He didn't approach. He just nodded once, deeply, as if to say, "Yes, that's it." After that, something settled in her chest. She wasn't performing. She was sharing. And that made all the difference. Word spread again, but differently this time. Less about mystery, more about feeling. A high school teacher brought her music class to the station one afternoon. Not to film, but to listen. "This," the teacher told her students, "is what music sounds like when it's honest." A nurse on her way home from a double shift sat on the floor and cried silently through an entire etude. No one asked for autographs. No one demanded encores. They just received what she offered. and gave back something invisible but real: presence. Then came the video that changed everything. A university student, filming a casual vlog about quiet moments in Japanese cities, happened to capture her full performance of the Fantasie Impromptu. He didn't zoom in dramatically. He didn't add dramatic music or captions. He just let the camera sit on a nearby bench, recording the rain outside, the distant train announcements, and her playing. Raw, unfiltered, human. He uploaded it that night with a simple title: Piano at Kyoto Station, October 12th. By morning, it had 50,000 views. By noon, 200,000 comments flooded in from around the world. A woman in Warsaw wrote, "My grandfather played this piece the night before he died. Thank you for bringing him back to me for 4 minutes." A teenager in Brazil said, "I've been depressed for months. This made me feel like I'm not alone." A music professor in Paris called it a masterclass in emotional truth over technical perfection. Her brother showed her the numbers on his phone, eyes wide. 200,000 people heard you, he whispered, as if saying it too loud might break the spell. She didn't feel proud. She felt exposed, like someone had opened the door to her bedroom and invited the world inside. She spent the day at the convenience store in a daze, scanning items on autopilot, jumping at every notification sound. That evening her mother made her favorite dish, grilled mackerel with pickled radish, and said, "If this becomes too heavy, we stop." No shame in that. The girl nodded, but part of her knew she couldn't stop now. Not because of the views, but because of the messages. The ones from people who said her music gave them courage to face another day. Within a week, offers arrived. A prestigious music conservatory in Tokyo sent a formal letter offering a full scholarship. A classical record label asked if she'd consider recording an album. Even the city's cultural affairs office reached out, suggesting she perform at an upcoming national arts festival. Each email felt like a door opening, but also like a path leading away from everything familiar. She showed the letters to her brother. He read them carefully, then looked up. "Would you have to move to Tokyo?" She nodded. His face fell, but he didn't say anything. Later that night, she found him practicing scales on a toy keyboard they'd bought at a secondhand shop years ago. "I want to play like you someday," he said when he saw her watching. Her throat tightened. She didn't reply to any of the offers. Not yet. Instead, she returned to the station the next morning, earlier than usual. The place was nearly empty. She played Chopin's Waltz in a minor, a gentle, bittersweet piece she'd learned from an old library book. As she played, she thought about her father's absence, her mother's silent sacrifices, her brother's quiet dreams. She thought about the strangers who'd cried, the students who'd listened, the old man who'd nodded. She wasn't just playing for herself anymore. She was playing for all of them. And in that realization, she found a strange kind of strength. By the end of the week, a small ritual had formed. Every Sunday morning, rain or shine, she'd sit at the station piano for exactly 1 hour. No announcements, no fanfare, just music, offered freely to whoever happened to pass by. Some days, only 2 people listened. Other days, 20. It didn't matter. She played the same way, with focus, with feeling, with her whole heart. People began leaving small tokens on the bench: a origami crane, a packet of green tea, a handwritten poem. She never took them. She gently placed them on a nearby shelf, where station staff later collected them for a community display. The piano gift, they called it. One afternoon, as she packed up to leave, the retired pianist approached. He introduced himself, just his first name, Hiroshi, and said, "I taught at the conservatory for 30 years. I've heard thousands of students. None played Chopin like you do." She blushed, unsure how to respond. He didn't offer advice or criticism. He just said, "Don't let anyone tell you your way is wrong. The world has enough perfect players. It needs more true ones." She walked home that day with his words echoing in her mind. The sky was clear. The streets smelled of roasted sweet potatoes from a nearby vendor. Her brother ran out to meet her halfway, waving a letter. "It's from the conservatory again," he said. "They're offering to cover travel so you can commute. You wouldn't have to move." She took the envelope but didn't open it right away. Instead, she sat on their tiny balcony, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where music wasn't just a secret, but a bridge. Not to fame, but to connection. not to escape but to deeper roots. That night she wrote her first reply. Not a yes, not a no, just a thank you and a request for more time. Because she was still just a 17-year-old girl, working part-time, worrying about exams, sharing a room with her brother. But she was also something more now, a voice in the noise, a quiet light in a busy world. And she was beginning to understand that those two truths could exist together, without one canceling out the other. The letter from the conservatory sat on the kitchen table for 3 days, unopened. Not out of disinterest, but because opening it felt like stepping onto a path with no return. She watched her mother move around the small apartment, folding laundry, boiling rice, humming under her breath, and wondered what life would look like if she said yes. Would she still be able to help with dinner? Would she miss her brother's school recitals? Would the music change if it became her job instead of her refuge? Her brother didn't press her. He just left sticky notes on the envelope. They said you can come home every weekend, and Mom says it's okay if you're scared. One morning he even drew a tiny piano on it with a smiley face. She laughed, but the weight remained. Finally, on a quiet Sunday, she opened it. The offer was generous, full tuition, a monthly stipend, even a reserved seat in a master class led by a visiting Polish pianist. But what struck her most was a handwritten note at the bottom. We don't want to polish you into something you're not. We want to learn from the way you already listen. It was signed by the head of the piano department, someone she'd only ever seen in concert programs. She showed it to her mother that evening while they washed dishes side by side. Her mother read it slowly, then set it down on the counter and dried her hands. You don't have to decide today, she said, or this month, or even this year. But there was a new softness in her eyes, a kind of quiet pride that hadn't been there before. Still, the decision loomed. Meanwhile, the station piano had become something of a quiet landmark. Locals began referring to Platform 3 as the music corner. The station staff, who once eyed the instrument as clutter, now kept it dusted and tuned. A small donation box appeared nearby, not for her but to maintain the piano. People dropped in coins, folded bills, even handwritten thank you notes. One read, I came here to end my life. I heard you play. I stayed. She cried when she read it, then carefully placed it in her notebook next to the old man's note. She kept playing every Sunday. Sometimes she brought her brother, who sat cross-legged on the floor with his sketchbook drawing the listeners instead of the performer. He'd started composing his own little melodies on the toy keyboard, humming them to her late at night. This one's for Mom, he'd say, or this is how rain sounds in spring. She'd listen, eyes closed, and feel her heart swell. Then came the invitation from Osaka. Not just any venue, a historic concert hall, wood-paneled and grand where legends had once played. The request was simple, a 30-minute recital as part of a Young Voices of Japan series. No pressure to sell tickets, no expectations beyond showing up and playing from the heart. The organizer had seen the viral video and wrote, We don't need perfection. We need truth. For days she wrestled with it. A real stage, real lights, real audience, not just passers-by, but people who came specifically to hear her. It felt like stepping into a different world, one where mistakes mattered more and silence wasn't golden but awkward. Her brother was the one who tipped the scale. If you say no, he said one night, you'll always wonder what would have happened. He didn't say you should go. He just named the fear she hadn't voiced, so she said yes. Preparation wasn't glamorous. She practiced in the early mornings before her shift, fingers stiff from cold. She replayed recordings of great pianists, not to copy but to understand how they shaped phrases, how they breathed between notes. But mostly she returned to Chopin's scores, reading them like letters from a friend who understood sorrow and joy in equal measure. The night before the recital, she couldn't sleep. She paced the tiny apartment, heart pounding as if she were already on stage. Her mother found her in the kitchen, staring into the fridge. Nervous? She asked, pouring 2 cups of warm barley tea. The girl nodded. What if I freeze? Like in middle school? Her mother sat beside her. Then you'll sit quietly for a moment, and when you're ready, you'll play again. That's all anyone can ask. The next day, they took the train to Osaka together, her mother, and her brother. None of them had been to a concert hall before. The building loomed like a temple, all marble and hushed reverence. Backstage smelled of rosin and old wood. A technician showed her the grand piano, a gleaming black beast that felt both majestic and intimidating. She ran her fingers over the keys during sound check. They were smoother, more responsive than the station piano, but somehow less forgiving. Every hesitation would be heard. Every breath amplified. Her brother squeezed her hand before she walked on stage. "Play like you do at home," he whispered. Like no one's listening, the lights dimmed. The audience, maybe 200 people, fell silent. She walked out in her school uniform. She refused to wear a dress. It didn't feel like her, bowed quickly and sat. For a heartbeat, panic rose. Then she thought of the station, the rain, the old woman with the bento box, the nurse who cried. She placed her hands on the keys and began. She opened with the nocturne, the same piece that started it all. This time it sounded deeper, more assured but no less tender. Then came the Fantasie Impromptu, played with a steadier hand but the same emotional honesty. For her final piece, she chose something unexpected, a simple Japanese folk melody her grandmother used to hum while folding laundry, "Sakura, Sakura." She'd arranged it herself for piano, weaving Chopin's harmonies into its gentle rise and fall. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't classical, but it was hers. When she finished, the silence returned. Not the kind that follows a mistake, but the kind that follows something sacred. Then slowly the room rose. Not in roaring applause, but in a standing ovation that felt more like a bow than a cheer. Afterward, people lingered. An elderly man with tears in his eyes said, "My wife loved that folk song. Thank you for bringing her back." A young girl shyly handed her a drawing of a piano under cherry blossoms. A music student asked how she made the notes feel like stories. She didn't stay long. She changed back into her street clothes, met her family in the lobby, and they ate takoyaki from a street vendor, laughing as hot octopus bits burned their fingers. On the train home, her brother fell asleep on her shoulder. Her mother held her hand and didn't say a word, but something had shifted. Back in Kyoto, she returned to the station the following Sunday. Fewer people came. Life had moved on, as it always does, but those who were there listened just as deeply. She played the folk melody again, and this time a few people hummed along softly. A week later, she replied to the conservatory. She accepted, but with conditions. She would commute. She would keep her part-time job. She would not move to Tokyo. To her surprise, they agreed. "Your life is your music," the reply read. "We won't ask you to leave it behind." Around the same time, a small classical label reached out, not with a contract, but with a proposal. Record 1 album. Just Chopin and the folk piece, with no edits, no studio tricks. All proceeds would go to fund free music lessons for children in underserved neighborhoods. She liked that. It felt like giving back without losing herself. Recording sessions were held in a quiet studio near Kyoto, over 3 weekends. No producers shouting directions. No pressure to sell the performance. Just her, the piano, and an engineer who said, "Play like you're alone in the room." She did. And when it was done, she listened to the playback and finally heard what others had been saying all along. Not perfection, but presence. The album released quietly, with no fanfare. But within weeks, schools began using it in music classes. A community center in Sapporo invited her to lead a workshop. She said yes, but only if it was free for all attendees. Through it all, she remained the same girl who folded laundry, helped with dinner, and worried about her brother's math grades. Fame didn't stick to her like glitter. It passed through, like wind through trees, leaving only ripples. One evening, as she walked home from the station, she passed a young boy sitting on a bench, strumming a ukulele badly but with great joy. He saw her and stopped. "Are you the piano girl?" he asked. She nodded, embarrassed. He grinned. "I want to be like you, play for people, not for likes." She smiled. "Just play for yourself first," she said. "The rest will come." That night, she sat on their balcony again, watching the city lights. Her brother joined her, holding 2 mugs of tea. "What's next?" he asked. She didn't know. Maybe more recitals. Maybe teaching. Maybe just Sundays at the station forever. But for the first time, the unknown didn't scare her, because she'd learned that music wasn't about destinations. It was about showing up again and again with an open heart. And in a world that often felt loud, rushed, and disconnected, that was more than enough. Life settled into a new kind of rhythm, not quieter but fuller. Mornings began with the soft clatter of breakfast dishes, her brother half asleep at the table, her mother already dressed for work. Then came the train to Tokyo, 2 hours each way, headphones on, sheet music open on her lap. She'd stare out the window as rice fields and rooftops blurred past, her fingers tracing invisible keys on her knees. At the conservatory, she was just another student, though some professors lingered after class to ask how she shaped a phrase or found silence between notes. She never gave grand answers. "I just listen," she'd say, and they'd nod as if that explained everything. She kept her job at the convenience store, working weekends and holidays. Customers still didn't recognize her. Why would they? She wore the same uniform, scanned the same onigiri, smiled the same tired smile. But sometimes when the store was empty late at night, she'd hum a Chopin melody while restocking shelves, and the night manager would pause his clipboard and say, "That's the station girl's tune, isn't it?" She'd blush and change the subject. Back in Kyoto, Sundays remained sacred. No matter how exhausted she was from classes or travel, she returned to the station piano. The crowd had thinned. People had moved on to the next viral moment, the next sensation. But a few regulars remained. The grandmother with the bento box now brought extra portions for the pianist. The retired pianist, Hiroshi, sometimes sat nearby with a thermos, offering a quiet word only if she asked. And always, her brother waited on the bench closest to the piano, sketchbook in hand, drawing not her but the faces of those who listened. One Sunday, a little girl, no older than 6, stood frozen in front of the piano as she played the nocturne. When the piece ended, the child stepped forward, placed a single origami crane on the bench, and ran back to her mother. Later, the mother approached, eyes glistening. She's been too shy to speak since her grandfather passed. But today she made that crane just for you. The girl tucked the crane into her notebook next to the notes and poems. It wasn't fame. It was something quieter, deeper, a thread of connection spun note by note. But not everything was gentle. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling theory exam, she arrived at the station later than usual. As she sat down to play, a group of teenagers nearby began whispering loudly, filming on their phones. "Is this really her?" one said. "She looks so normal," another laughed. "Bet she's faking it. No way a convenience store worker plays like that." Her hands froze above the keys. The old fear rose. The one that said she didn't belong, that she was an imposter in a world of polished prodigies. She almost walked away. But then she remembered Hiroshi's words. "The world has enough perfect players. It needs more true ones." She took a breath, lowered her hands and began, not with Chopin, but with the folk melody, Sakura Sakura, simple, honest, unhurried. The teens kept filming, but as the music unfolded, their laughter faded. One lowered her phone. Another sat down. By the end, even they were quiet. Afterward, one of them approached. "Sorry," she mumbled. "I didn't think. It actually felt real." The girl just nodded.
"It is." That moment stayed with her.
Not because she'd won anything, but because she'd held her ground. Not with anger, but with music. It reminded her that authenticity wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was just showing up, again and again, even when doubt whispered in your ear. Meanwhile, the album she'd recorded began to ripple outward in ways she never expected. A teacher in rural Hokkaido wrote to say her students, many of whom had never touched a piano, were learning Sakura Sakura on classroom keyboards. A nonprofit in Okinawa used the proceeds to buy instruments for a community center. And one day a letter arrived from Warsaw. Not an email. A real letter written in careful English on thick paper. It was from the Chopin Institute. They'd heard her recording. They invited her to play at a small cultural gathering during the Chopin Festival. Not as a headliner, but as a guest who understands the soul behind the notes. She read it 3 times. Poland, Chopin's homeland. The idea felt too big, too symbolic. She showed it to her mother, who held it like it might dissolve. "You'd have to fly," her mother said softly. "Stay in a hotel. Be away for a week." Her brother, overhearing, went very still. That night over dinner he asked, "Will you go?" She didn't answer right away. She thought of the cost, the time, the distance. But more than that, she thought of the little girl with the origami crane, the nurse who cried, the teenager who apologized. Her music wasn't hers alone anymore. It belonged to them, too. I think I have to, she said finally. Her mother nodded. Then we'll manage. Her brother didn't speak for the rest of the meal, but later she found a new drawing on her pillow, a plane flying over cherry blossoms with a tiny piano in the window. Preparations were quiet. She saved extra shifts at the store. Her mother took on more kimono repairs. Her brother sold his old video games to help with the flight. No one made a fuss. They just did what needed to be done, like mending a tear in fabric stitch by careful stitch. When the day came, she packed light one dress, a gift from her mother, her notebook, the origami crane, and a small photo of her family. At the airport, her brother hugged her so tightly she couldn't breathe. Play the folk song there too, he whispered, so they know where you're from. Warsaw in autumn was colder than she expected. The streets smelled of chestnuts and damp leaves. The Chopin Institute was modest, not a grand hall but a warm, wood-paneled room filled with scholars, musicians, and locals who loved the composer like a family member. There were no bright lights, no cameras, just a beautiful old piano and a hushed anticipation. She played Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major first, the piece that started it all. Then, to everyone's surprise, she played Sakura Sakura, weaving it into a quiet improvisation that blended Japanese melody with Chopin's harmonies. When she finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then an elderly woman in the front row stood and bowed deeply. Others followed. No applause, just respect, offered in the way her own culture understood best. Afterward, a man with silver hair and kind eyes approached. He introduced himself as a curator at the Institute. Chopin never visited Japan, he said, but he wrote music for the human heart. You reminded us of that. He handed her a small book, Chopin's Letters, translated into Japanese. For the girl at the station, he said with a smile. She cried on the flight home. Back in Kyoto, life resumed its pace, but she was different. Not louder, not prouder, but steadier. She knew now that music wasn't about where you played, but why. And her why had never changed. To offer comfort, connection, a moment of stillness in a rushing world. One Sunday, as she packed up after playing, Hiroshi sat beside her. You've grown, he said simply. Not in skill, in courage. She looked at him surprised. I still get scared, she admitted. Every time, he smiled. Good, that means you still care. Around this time, she began visiting a local community center once a month, teaching basic piano to children whose families couldn't afford lessons. She didn't call it teaching. She called it playing together. The kids banged on the keys, made up silly songs, sometimes cried when they couldn't get a note right. She never corrected them harshly. Music isn't about getting it perfect, she'd say. It's about saying something only you can say. One boy, shy and small, struggled with every scale. But one day he played 3 notes in a row that sounded like rain. She clapped. That's yours, she told him. No one else can make that sound. His face lit up. Her brother started joining her at the center, helping younger kids with rhythm games. I want to be a teacher, he told her one evening. Like you, she ruffled his hair. You already are. As winter approached, the conservatory asked if she'd perform at their year-end recital. This time she didn't hesitate. She chose a program that mixed Chopin with short pieces by Japanese composers, music that spoke of both her roots and her journey. Her family came, sitting in the back so as not to distract her. Afterward, her mother handed her a small box. Inside was a new notebook, thick paper, smooth cover, blank pages waiting. For the next chapter, she said. That night she walked to the station alone. The piano was empty. She sat not to perform but to remember. She played the Nocturne slowly, softly, as if whispering to her younger self, the girl who trembled on that rainy afternoon, afraid no one would listen. But someone had. And because of that, everything changed. Not in a dramatic, movie-like way, but in the quiet accumulation of moments. A shared silence, a folded crane, a child's first note, a mother's sacrifice, a brother's pride. These were the real notes of her life, more powerful than any concert hall echo. And as the last chord faded into the night, she knew she'd keep playing, not for 200,000, but for the one who needed to hear it, even if that one was herself. Time doesn't stop for anyone. Not for prodigies, not for quiet girls who play piano in train stations, not even for those whose music touches hundreds of thousands. Seasons turned. Snow dusted the rooftops of Kyoto, melted into cherry blossoms, then gave way to the thick green heat of summer. Through it all, she kept moving, not toward fame but toward balance. She attended classes in Tokyo, worked weekends at the store, taught children at the community center, and every Sunday without fail, returned to the station piano. It had become less of a choice and more of a rhythm, like breathing. Her brother grew taller, his voice deeper, his sketches more detailed. He'd started composing short pieces of his own, simple melodies that echoed the sound of rain on their balcony or the hum of the refrigerator at night. One evening, he played one for her on the old upright. "It's called Sunday at Platform 3, he said shyly. She listened with eyes closed, then hugged him so tightly he laughed. "You're getting good," she whispered. "Better than me." He shook his head. "I just want to make people feel the way you do." Her mother's hands grew more lined, but her smile stayed the same. Soft, steady, full of quiet pride. She still stitched kimonos for festivals, though now she sometimes hummed along to Chopin while she worked. Once a customer asked if she was the mother of that pianist from the station. She simply nodded and kept sewing. No fanfare, no explanation. Just a quiet yes, like it was the most natural thing in the world. The conservatory no longer treated her as a curiosity. She was just another student, though one who often stayed late to help younger classmates with phrasing, or who brought homemade onigiri to share during practice breaks. Professors stopped asking how she got so emotional and started asking her to demonstrate how she shaped silence. She never gave lectures. She just played and let the music speak. But the biggest change wasn't in her schedule or her skills. It was in her understanding of what music truly was. It wasn't about stages or recordings or even technique. It was about presence, about showing up imperfectly, honestly, and offering something real in a world that often felt staged and hollow. One spring morning, as she walked to the station, she passed a young boy sitting on a bench with a second-hand keyboard, practicing scales with clumsy fingers. He looked up when he saw her and froze. "You're her," he said, voice hushed. She smiled. "Just a girl who likes piano." He hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever get nervous?" She sat beside him. "Every time," she said. "But the music helps." He nodded as if that made perfect sense and went back to his scales, this time with a little more courage. That small exchange stayed with her. It reminded her that her journey wasn't just hers anymore. It had become a kind of quiet permission for others to be shy, to be imperfect, to believe that their voice mattered, even if it trembled. Later that day at the station, she played a new piece, one she'd been working on for weeks. Not Chopin this time, but a short composition of her own. It had no title, just a few lines in her notebook, for the ones who listen with their hearts. The melody was simple, built from the sound of rain, the rhythm of train wheels, the quiet hum of her mother's sewing machine. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. As she played, a few people stopped. Not because they recognized her, but because the music felt like a hand on their shoulder saying, "It's okay. You're not alone." Afterward, an elderly man approached. He didn't say much, just handed her a small envelope. Inside was a photo of a young woman playing piano in a sunlit room. On the back, in careful handwriting, "My daughter." She loved Chopin. "Thank you for keeping his music alive in your own way." She tucked the photo into her notebook, next to the origami crane and the letters from strangers. That evening, back home, her brother asked if she'd ever record her own music. "Not Chopin," he clarified. "Your songs." She thought about it. "Maybe," she said. "But only if it's free. Only if it helps someone." He grinned. "Then I'll help you record it." They did it in their living room late at night with a borrowed microphone and her old upright. No fancy equipment, no edits, just raw, honest sound. When it was done, they uploaded it to a small platform with a simple note: "For anyone who needs a quiet moment." Within days, messages poured in, not about technique, but about how the music helped someone fall asleep or get through a hard day, or remember a loved one. She never checked the numbers. She didn't need to. As graduation from the conservatory neared, offers came again, bigger this time. A European tour, a recording contract with international distribution, a residency at a prestigious art center. Each one glittered with possibility, but also with distance. She read them carefully, then set them aside. One night she sat with her mother on the balcony, sipping tea under a sky full of stars. "What will you do after school ends?" her mother asked gently. She looked out at the city lights, familiar, comforting. I think I'll stay, she said. Teach here, play at the station, maybe start a small program for kids who can't afford lessons. Her mother reached over and squeezed her hand. That sounds like you. Her brother, now nearly as tall as her, had his own plans. He'd been accepted to a music education program in Osaka, not to perform, but to teach. I want to help kids find their sound, he said. Like you helped me. She felt a swell of pride so deep it almost hurt. On the day of her final recital at the conservatory, the hall was full not just with faculty and students, but with people from Kyoto, the station staff, the community center kids, even the convenience store manager. Her family sat in the front row. She didn't play the grandest pieces. She played the nocturne that started it all, the folk melody that grounded her, and her own short composition, now titled Platform 3. When she finished, there was no standing ovation. Just a long, deep silence followed by warm, steady applause. Afterward, a little girl from the community center ran up and hugged her legs. I'm going to play like you someday, she said. The girl knelt down. Then play like yourself, she replied. That's even better. In the months that followed, life settled into a new kind of ordinary. She began teaching part-time at a local music school, but only on her terms. Small classes, low fees, no pressure to compete. She still worked occasional shifts at the store, not because she needed to, but because it kept her connected to the everyday rhythm of the city she loved. And every Sunday, without fail, she returned to the station. The piano was still there. The bench still creaked. The same grandmother still brought bento. Hiroshi still sat nearby with his thermos. And her brother, when he was home from Osaka, still sketched the listeners. One rainy Sunday, as she played the nocturne, a young woman stood at the edge of the crowd, holding a baby in a sling. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't look away. After the piece ended, she approached. I lost my husband last year, she said softly. He loved this song. Today is his birthday. Thank you for playing it. The girl didn't know what to say, so she just bowed and played it again, just for her. That was the thing no one had told her at the beginning. Music wasn't about being heard by many. It was about being heard by the one who needed it most. Years later, when people asked how it all began, she never talked about views or virality. She talked about rain, about a dusty piano, about a mother who sold her ring, about a brother who believed in her before anyone else did. She talked about silence and how sometimes the most powerful thing you can offer is a moment of stillness in a noisy world. She never became a global star. She never played at Carnegie Hall or appeared on magazine covers. But in Kyoto and in the hearts of those who'd listened, she became something rarer, a quiet constant. A reminder that beauty doesn't need a spotlight to exist. It only needs someone willing to show up and share it. And so, on another gray afternoon with rain falling gently outside and the station humming with the usual rush, she sat at the piano once more. She opened her notebook, now thick with notes, drawings, letters, and memories, and placed her hands on the keys. She didn't play for 200,000. She played for the tired nurse, the grieving mother, the shy boy with the keyboard, her brother, her mother, and herself. The first note rang out, clear, soft, human, and somewhere, in the quiet spaces between the notes, the world listened.